Okay, I think we're a couple of minutes past the starting time now, so maybe this is a good point to kick off with our introductions. So I'd just like to quickly welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today on our webinar concerning community engaged research on Arctic waters. And today's talk is a co-presentation by two communities of practice sponsored by the MEOPAR network, specifically the Coast and Ocean Risk Communication Community of Practice and the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum. I'm Joel Fennis, co-lead of the Coast and Ocean Risk Communication Community of Practice, and I'll be moderating this afternoon with Jennifer Steele from the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum. Now, a few quick items before I introduce today's speakers. First, I'd like to start with a respectful acknowledgement that we're speaking today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of many Indigenous peoples. Now, I'm personally coming to you from the ancestral homeland of the Beothuk and Mi'kmaq, and would also like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatukavut, as well as the Innu of Nitassinan, as the original peoples of Labrador, also connected to the province that I'm in. Now, I'd encourage us all to reflect on our own local Indigenous histories and peoples as we strive towards true reconciliation and respectful relationships with all peoples. And in this case, across Canada, but with the current nature of our webinar, perhaps even abroad. Now, secondly, I would like to alert everybody to the fact that we are recording today's session. You should see the recording light already on. I just want you to keep that in mind as we go forward, just in case that's a particular concern for you. Now, finally, I would like to thank Cindy Marvin and Jennifer Steele, respectively of MEOPAR and Clear Seas, and our COPs behind this event today, for organizing the event, as well as for ensuring that it runs smoothly. And now I'll quickly introduce our three speakers for the day. I'm gonna run with speaking order and begin with Dr. Natalie Carter. Natalie is a research associate with both the Department of Geography, Environment, and Geomatics at the University of Ottawa and the School of Earth, Environment, and Society at McMaster University. She's working with the Straight Up North research team, as well as the Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices research projects. In this role, I should say, she actively engages Inuit and Northerners in developing management strategies related to national marine policy initiatives, including Arctic shipping. Natalie spends roughly a quarter of her time in Arctic communities, working closely with people of all ages, from youth through to elders. While there, she strives to enhance youth capacity while facilitating co-construction of projects, developing local knowledge, and analyzing, validating, and sharing research results. Next, we'll hear from Shirley Tagalik. Shirley's a retired educator living in Arviat, Nunavut, who has worked at all levels of the early child care and school system and led the curriculum division of early childhood and school services for 10 years. She's an active researcher in the areas of education, child development, language development, youth engagement, youth suicide prevention, climate change, food security, determinants of health, healing, and cultural revitalization. And for the last 20 years, she has been actively working with Inuit elders to document their cultural knowledge. Shirley serves as a volunteer director on the Arviat Akiamuvik Society, a community group dedicated to addressing concerns through community-driven research and innovative programming. Then finally, we're going to hear from Keenan, or Nooks, Lindell. Nooks is an Inuk from Arviat, Nunavut, currently working as Ujik-Suinuk coordinator for the Akiamuvik Society. Keenan has 2 years of Nunavut Sivuniksavut, where he studied and researched Inuit history, Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut land claim agreements and negotiations, Inuktitut, interviewing, and history of Arctic research. He earned a certificate in the environmental technology program from Nunavut Arctic College, where he studied wildlife biology, environmental monitoring, and developed on-the-land skills. In addition to years as a wildlife technician for the government of Nunavut, in his current role with Akiamuvik, Nooks has 6 years of varied research experience, from conducting data collection through to communicating results, collaborating with Inuit organizations, youth, and Southern researchers. So with that, that's a long introduction, but I'll invite our presenters to begin with a bit of an introduction from Natalie Carter. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Joel, for those introductions. I'm really happy to be here today to speak about our Arctic corridors and Northern Voices research and to be part of this panel. The project I'm going to speak about is led by Dr. Jackie Dawson. She's an associate professor and also the director of the Environment, Society and Policy Group at University of Ottawa. And I'm the community research lead for the project. I'm a settler, meaning non-Indigenous, and I'm presenting today from Southern Ontario in Canada. I'd like to begin by recognizing the participation and contributions of our 133 research participants, as well as the contributions made by our 59 youth community researchers, many of whom are shown in the collage on the right here, and our partners and transdisciplinary team members, both Northern and Southern based, also shown in these photos. I'd also like to acknowledge the financial support provided for the conduct of this research. And like Joel, I'd like to thank Cindy Marvin and Jennifer Steele for the invitation to present today, and the Coast and Ocean Risk Communication Community of Practice, MEOPAR, Clear Seas, and the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum. So I'll start by briefly describing the Government of Canada-led Low Impact Shipping Corridors initiative that our research was conducted in response to, and describe our methods and collaborative partnered approach we used for the Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices research project. And I'm going to highlight key community identified concerns about shipping and recommendations for managing vessel traffic. And there's also much more information on our website, arcticcorridors.ca, shown here. Marine vessel traffic in Arctic Canada has more than doubled in the past 3 decades. And in response to that recent growth in marine vessel activity in the Canadian Arctic, and the fact that additional growth is expected as climate change continues to increase navigability in the region, the Canadian Coast Guard, Transport Canada, and Canadian Hydrographic Service are co-developing low-impact shipping corridors as an adaptation strategy. And an example of the corridors is shown here on this map. The corridors were originally known as Northern Marine Transportation Corridors, so you may have heard of them by that name. And in 2017, Transport Canada announced that the Government of Canada will enhance partnerships with Indigenous communities and Arctic stakeholders to establish these low-impact shipping corridors. The corridors established through that initiative will provide the infrastructure, navigational support, and emergency response services needed for safer marine navigation, while at the same time respecting the environment and local ecology and cultures. So the corridors have not yet been legislated, and they're still being refined by the federal agencies leading the corridors initiative. And while a large amount of data from different sources were used to establish the location of the corridors, important Inuit, local and traditional knowledge from Arctic communities has yet to be considered in much detail. Inuit, the Indigenous peoples in Arctic Canada, have a unique and dynamic culture and history. Inuit Nunangat means Inuit homeland in the Inuktitut language. And it includes not just the land, but also the water and ice in 4 settled land claim regions. It includes 53 communities shown here and encompasses roughly 35% of Canada's landmass and 50% of its coastline. Nearly 70% of the 65,000 Inuit in Canada live in Inuit Nunangat, and more than 1/3 of those communities have populations under 500 people, and most can only be reached by air year-round and by air and sea during the summer. The population is very young and one of the fastest growing in the country. Inuit harvest country foods such as seal, narwhal, caribou, fish, eggs, and berries to feed their families and communities. And they have strong connections to the land, water, and sea ice, on which they rely daily for sustenance and cultural practices. And Inuit have been thriving in the region for more than 4,000 years. So the omission of Inuit voices directly in the geographic prioritization of the low impact shipping corridors, or deciding where the corridors are placed, was a missed opportunity in the development of effective, safe, and sustainable corridors. But it was also contradictory to the moral and legal imperatives of Indigenous inclusion as they're laid out in the regional land claim agreements and in the Government of Canada's reconciliation agenda. Now, since the initial conceptualization of the low impact shipping corridors, there have been improvements over time, and federal agencies have begun engaging in consultation processes with Inuit organizations and communities. Our research project was established in 2014 in direct response to the vital need to consider Inuit knowledge of culturally significant marine areas in the maritime corridors across Arctic Canada. It was conceptualized during a multi-stakeholder workshop, and the aim of the Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices research project was to generate an inventory and a foundation of scientific and Inuit knowledge about shipping trends, shipping impacts, and culturally significant marine areas, as well as community identified recommendations for the low impact shipping corridors. So today I'm going to focus on the second and third goals shown here, given that the focus of today's webinar is on building a shared perspective in Arctic waters through community engaged research. So our southern-based team worked in and with 14 communities in Inuvialuit settlement region, shown here in yellow in Northwest Territories, Nunavut in sort of pinkish red, and in Nunavik in Northern Quebec, shown here in purple. And our partner communities are shown here with a star on the map. So we partnered in each community with organizations that are known to engage in collaborative projects and that also facilitate relationships that benefit both local researchers and visiting researchers. So in Arviat, for instance, we partnered with the Akumavik Society, and in other communities, we partnered with the Hunters and Trappers organizations or organizations such as the Karvik Barriers to Bridges program. As part of this, 59 Inuit and Northern youth, aged about 15 to 45 years old, were identified by community partners to participate in the community workshops, and the youth were co-facilitators. So in each community, the youth participated in a 3-day-long co-learning event. And along with our community partners and other team members, I taught them the research methods needed for this project, but they taught me how best to conduct research in their communities. So youth raised awareness about the project, taught me about local seasons and wildlife, harvesting activity, what areas to map, who should participate in the mapping workshops, who should interpret, and they identified potential intersecting or hot topics in the community that might come up during the workshops, also that we'd be prepared. Then together, we hosted community workshops. We met with elders, people who were active on the land, who had expert knowledge of a variety of geographical locations. And so during these workshops, what you're seeing in these pictures is that participants were identifying wildlife habitat, for instance, feeding and breeding locations and migratory routes, local harvesting and camping sites, local travel routes. And we discussed the potential impacts of marine vessel traffic and marine vessel management recommendations for each season. So we started by mapping culturally significant marine areas in each season, essentially places where wildlife are found and places where community members fish, hunt, travel, and harvest on the land, freshwater, sea ice, and ocean. So this is an example from Coral Harbor at the time when the ocean is open water, unfrozen. And essentially any of the areas in green here are areas where walrus are found or walrus hollouts. And in the figure on the right are areas where community members are traveling to harvest and going back and forth between Coral Harbor and Walrus Island and Coates Island. And we have well over 100 maps like this for each season and for each community. I'll share some highlights of impacts and risks related to marine vessel traffic that communities identified during our discussions of marine vessels transiting the low impact shipping corridors and also passing through those culturally significant marine areas. And what we've learned is that shipping is very important. There are no roads into or out of communities. Ships bring equipment, vehicles, dry goods, fuel, and lumber. And ships create some, but only limited local employment opportunities. What we also heard is that it's already very challenging. It's already very challenging and expensive to find wildlife when hunting. There's a high demand for fresh country food or wild meat. Hunters are having to go farther to harvest whales and seals than in the past. And changing weather conditions and patterns are making it increasingly dangerous to travel. Increased marine vessel traffic creates additional hunting uncertainty because ships and ship noise are disturbing marine wildlife and causing them to abandon traditional habitat, making it even harder for hunters to locate and harvest them. And the resulting lack of country food affects residents' food security, mental and physical health, and causes a financial strain. We also heard concerns that marine vessels risk running into rocks or reefs, and if an oil spill occurred, it would be catastrophic. In every community, participants said that oil spill response is inadequate, and they would not be able to respond adequately if a spill occurred. Community members were also concerned about ballast water and other products marine vessels are putting in the water. And they explained that when ships or icebreakers disturb sea ice formation, freeze up is delayed. And this also delays residents' travel on sea ice and creates dangerous conditions where harvesters could be stranded or even fall through the thin ice. And it also creates rough ice that slows down local traffic or means that travelers have to break new trails to snowmobile around the icy rubble that forms after ships break the ice. We are marine people 365 days per year, one participant said. We can't just move inland a few kilometers and take up a different way of life. Money cannot replace the loss of our ability to travel and hunt. This, the ocean, is our farm. And you wouldn't just put a highway through a farm without talking to a farmer first. This, the ocean, is our grocery store. So now I'll share some of the community identified recommendations for the low impact shipping corridors and for marine vessel management. So some key community identified recommendations, were related to preferred corridors, areas to avoid, seasonal shipping restrictions, vessel operation modifications, and areas where charting is needed. All of these recommendations were made to preserve areas that are important to local wildlife and to mitigate the impacts of marine vessel traffic on Inuit harvesting and travel. So this map is an overview of the low impact shipping corridors and the community identified recommendations that were mapped. And these and other similar maps can be found in our paper that was published in 2020, and it's available open access or publicly free of charge. So here on the map, the dark blue lines, kind of with lines in them, are sections of the federally proposed corridors, so the low impact shipping corridors, where we didn't speak to community members about these areas. And so we don't have information or recommendations about those. The lighter blue part of the corridors were parts that the federal government had proposed and that community members essentially were comfortable with, and they preferred these. They were fine to leave as is. The red corridors are limited corridors. So one where communities have identified that there should be restricted or limited use. So this could be, for instance, could only be used at certain times or perhaps only for essential travel or by only certain types of vessels. The purple are ones that communities have proposed. So new corridors that weren't suggested by the federal government. And then these small light red areas are areas that communities would want vessels to avoid entirely. Now, each of these recommendations is informed by rich context to the significance of these areas and the risks associated with marine vessel traffic. So for instance, the figure on the left is the same one that I showed earlier of the walrus habitat. And on the right are the associated recommendations made by Coral Harbor community members. So what they said is that this corridor, which was already existing, that shown in green, only ships that are going into Coral Harbor for a specific purpose should take this route in green. Any ships that were not going into Coral Harbor should go south of Coates Island, down in this light blue area. And that certainly ships should avoid, in bright red, this area between Coates Island and Walrus Island. And that recommendation wasn't made in order to decrease the impacts on marine mammals, especially walruses, and the hunters between Coates Island, Walrus Island, and Coral Harbor. And the community acknowledged that this might cost ship operators a bit more money due to taking a longer transit going south of the island, and also that the weather may sometimes make it unsafe for ships to take this less protected route south of Coates Island. So they recommended that ships also be made available real-time weather information for that section of the corridor going south of Coates Island, and they would only utilize it when it was safe to do so. Otherwise, they maybe would have to pass through this red zone. So this recommendation actually resulted in Agnico Eagle Mines working with their shipping company to make this happen. And they're now communicating annually with the community about where the ships are going and having regular updates on this topic. Across communities, we documented many other recommendations beyond just those that were mapped. So for instance, shipping companies were encouraged to have a communication protocol wherein the community would be notified if a ship's schedule or the route changes, or if a spill or other incident happens. Every community stated they are not prepared to respond to spills and that they need to be. And that there's a need for ships to be prepared to respond to and contain spills and communicate immediately with the community, and also incorporate local knowledge in spills response and containment. Community members have expertise about the water, ice, and land, and so they recommended that search and rescue and spills response seek input from the community, so local knowledge can contribute to those operations. Another recommendation was to form a committee that would be involved with the corridors in the north. It would involve hunters, the community, and the territories. It would involve the whole north because the corridors involve the whole north. And in every community, they said that they should be and wish to be actively involved on an ongoing basis in the development and management of the low impact shipping corridors. Now, a key component of the Arctic Corridors and Shipping Voices research project was that we did impactful sharing of results and data. So for instance, this included writing a report for each community, verifying it with the youth and with the research participants, and then sharing it broadly, including with communities. Verifying and sharing results in and with communities through radio call-in shows, open houses, and presentations to local organizations made it possible for the community to know more about this research. We also shared electronic data with the federal government. We've made all our publications freely available on our website, and that includes digital maps. And of course, we've given a number of presentations to interested groups, just as I am today. So the Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices research project has had and continues to have significant and lasting impacts across multiple sectors. Federal and territorial agencies, Inuit organizations, and private businesses are using Arctic Corridors and Northern Voices research project results in a variety of ways. Just a few examples: creating boundaries for an Arctic marine protected area north of Ellesmere Island, developing the interim management plan for Taluritiap-Mamanga National Marine Conservation Area. The results were used as evidence to establish an official notice to mariners to avoid key areas north of King William Island during caribou migration. And as I mentioned, rerouting of mine-related ships as well. In conclusion, communities in Inuit Nunangat are in favor of the low impact shipping corridors. However, the currently proposed corridors require changes that reflect cultural and local practices and priorities. All of the communities recommended additional communication and consultation with Arctic communities and organizations regarding corridor placement and governance. Additional research is needed to consider recommendations about increased shipping beyond the low impact shipping corridors. And there's certainly a need to examine governance and policy strategies that will respond to rights holder and stakeholder knowledge and perspectives about shipping and coastal management. Thank you so much for your attention. And I'll now turn it over to Shirley Tagalik to continue our discussion.
Thank you, Natalie. Oops. I'm going to just share my screen here. So I've been asked to give a perspective from a community that was engaged with the research. And so I'm very grateful to the organizers for this opportunity. We participated in the research, and a lot of the work that we do is engaging community in understanding research and in moving research forward. So, I'm trying to move my PowerPoint. There we go, sorry. Arviat is located on the west coast of Hudson Bay in the Kivalliq district. We're a community of about 3,000 people, and we occupy a very, very rich harvesting area. However, it is an area that's been experiencing rapid climate change, and that impacts significantly on wildlife health. It's specifically impacting on our rates of precipitation, and that affects our water levels and our ice conditions. The Akiyamavik Society is a community-driven wellness group. They are committed to identifying reliable evidence from community-driven research so that we can respond with effective programming that meets the needs of our community members. So we ground our work in principles of self-reliance and capacity building that are foundational to Inuit Kauyimayaktukangit. We're also committed to the revitalization of Inuit cultural principles and practice. We are documenting Inuit knowledge and cultural strengths that are sustainable and will help us in planning to move forward in a good way. For Inuit, knowledge can only emerge through application. And so for us, it's essential that all research result in an application that leads to improving conditions for the common good. And this is a core commitment for the Akiyamavik Society. Our kind of flagship program at Akiyamavik is the Uijiksuinak Young Hunters Program. The Young Hunters Program has been delivered since 2012. It engages youth with elders and community experts to build skills and knowledge in areas of values and beliefs, sustainable harvesting, conservation, observation, and ongoing monitoring of wildlife health and environmental well-being. It provides high levels of training to youth in very broad areas of research and application of research. Youth are trained to become message carriers back to our community in order to engage community members in helping to make meaning about the changes that we're seeing and how that may be impacting us into the future. So research is a critical process. We participate widely in research and we partner with a variety of experts. All of our activities are grounded in, first and foremost, Inuit cultural perspectives and experiences on the topic that we're investigating. Our youth are trained with elders and community experts to gather relevant data, and we use that data to inform planning going forward. Any partner who wants to work with us has to be willing to address our research questions in addition to their own in order to build our knowledge and provide specific skill training to our youth. in exchange, we offer cultural training to researchers who are interested in working with us. And we also engage with those researchers in using data that's been collected, interpreting that with youth in ways that youth can share back that data to the community to engage in collective solution seeking. Working on the ocean, as Natalie indicated, you know, just about every Nunavut community except one is located on the coast. And so oceans are very important to us. In terms of our involvement with our coast, we've identified rapid changes in our ocean conditions as a key priority for all our monitoring activities. Initially, we created maps of our entire coast and inland harvesting areas, identifying those maps using common Inuktitut place names. And we've made those maps widely available in our community, and we use those, or trying to use those Inuktitut place names in our training with the Wijisuinak young hunters. We are also a partner with Smart Ice to track and monitor changes in ice conditions and to promote safe travel advisories in the community with, you know, really drastically changing ice conditions that we're experiencing. As seen here, we're using marine mapping of our coastline as another safety precaution. We don't have any accurate coastal maps for our area. And because the west coast of Hudson Bay is experiencing glacial rebound, that is significantly affecting the ocean levels and wildlife activities. We see many, many reefs suddenly appearing that are unmarked and are uncharted. So we are monitoring this through our marine mapping, but at the same time, we're monitoring the health of our rivers and streams as precipitation levels are reduced and water quality impacts on the health of fish. We're looking at how those rivers and streams are resupplying water to our ocean, and if that is going to be insufficient to maintain ocean water levels. We've been engaging in specific research partnerships so that we can identify coastal use areas and the impacts of change in safety and water levels. And we're interested in considering the possible impacts of increased shipping, as Natalie has just outlined, specifically because we see in the future, with increased mining activity just north of us, and Churchill as being a key resupply, that there will be changes to the numbers of shipping operations coming through our waters. So in this project, youth were engaged with elders and community experts in the creation of these maps, as you can see on the left. And we feel the maps are going to give us baseline data for future study. Participants also identified, you know, the areas of concern of these potential impacts. And in the box on the right, you can see an example of one of the concerns that was identified in the Arviat Arctic Corridors research project. So this has created opportunities for us to consider our own research activities and what we need to do to effectively assess these impacts. So you'll see here, we recognize that the waters are becoming shallower, and that this may mean that contaminants and contaminants that are affecting wildlife will have a greater impact. So we need to adjust our monitoring activities so that we're really able to track some of these areas of concern. So the implication from the work that was done in the Arctic Corridors project will position us to ask better questions for ourselves to collect our own data to help, outline those questions, and hopefully to be able to plan more effectively for a safe future for use in our waters. From our Arviat research, there were about 20 recommendations that emerged. And so those are ones that we're keeping our eye on as we move forward. In terms of communicating our outcomes, for Akkumavik, one of our longstanding activities has always been training youth to document our findings and to share those back to the community. So we talk about our youth as being message carriers. We want the community to be able to understand and access good information on which we can collectively build a shared understanding in order to plan more sustainably going forward. We want our youth to have the skills to be able to lead the kinds of engagement activities that are required to promote awareness within the community. And from this activity, it builds youth confidence and also their reputation as being contributing members of the community. And it encourages them on a path to leadership. It also gives them an opportunity to develop skills with which they can move forward onto their own career path into the future. So our programs have been recognized as impacting youth resilience and positive well-being. And our research activities are a way that we focus on significantly contributing to that outcome. So there's more detail available about our programs and our approach, especially our research methodology on our website and also our Facebook page. We also have about 40 youth-generated video productions that are available on our YouTube site, which document many of the research and the training opportunities that youth have been engaged in our community. So thank you very much for our interest. I hope you have a better understanding of Arviat and how communities in Nunavut especially are approaching research. I'm going to turn it over to Nooks Lindell, who can describe the impacts of youth engagement as we move forward. Nooks?
Hey, matna Shirley. Thank you, Shirley. Yeah, you said a lot of great stuff there about the Akkumavik Society and what we do. So just to remind everybody, I'm Keenan Nooks Lindell, the Ujjakswin coordinator. So one of the aspects of the Ujjakswin program is the research aspect and the young hunters. We'll just be showing you guys some pictures as I talk about, the importance of involving youth in research. So I'm going to start with a bit of history. Some of you are probably aware, but some of you might be hearing it for the first time. Most of you would know that Arctic research has been happening for a very long time now. When research was first happening in the Arctic, it didn't really involve Inuit. There was not very much consultation or none at all. And Inuit definitely weren't leading the research and having a say of what was important to them. And even it was used in ways to harm Inuit back in the 50s and 60s. I think before then too, some hunting was prohibited because some Southerners thought they knew best, I guess, and shouldn't be hunting animals at certain seasons. And Inuit really suffered from that. A lot of people went hungry. There were people arrested. So naturally, to this day, there is a bit of distrust with Inuit in research. And so I wanted to give you a bit of history as Aki Muvik. One of the things that we're trying to do, and youth is really important to this, is that we're showing the youth that we can be the ones in charge of the research. Shirley spoke a bit about the Aki Muvik, the hybrid research method that we use, and it's very simple and it just makes sense. That we ask the community what they want researched. This is something that didn't happen in the past, and like she said, we want research that actually benefits us, and we want our people to be a part of it. And engaging youth just makes sense. With the youth, we could start them at an early age. In the Ujasuina program, they can learn modern research methods and about their land. And we partner with the people we want to partner with that can, make these things happen. We don't have, there are very few Inuit biologists, but that is the goal. So partnering with people that know these things is really important. And then we can teach the youth and show them that they can do research. I think for, like, when I was growing up, it seemed something that, that Southerners do. It's not something that Inuit do. And there was no, that was kind of like black and white. There was researchers and then there was Inuit. So we're trying to bridge that gap. And with the Ujasuina program, we also can show them that Inuit did have science, that Inuit ways of knowing were very intelligent, and we use elders as much as we can because those are our academics, and they know more about the land and the wildlife than anybody else, more than any researcher. So really, we're trying to give them the tools to be able to be the ones in the future that make the decisions and do the research of our land. And back in the 70s, one of the biggest reasons for Inuit, Inuit coming together and negotiating for the Nunavut land claims was that we wanted to be able to have a say in what happens in our land. And so it just makes sense to groom youth to be able to become researchers and do the research that is needed, along with the IQ that we can then also teach them in the program with the help of our elders. So really bridging the gap between the elders teaching the youth, and then the youth also learning these modern research methods, which is in a lot of ways necessary. If you're, most of you will know, if you're trying to change something, even though there's been a surge of the importance of Inuit knowledge and IQ values, being able to stop a mine because a couple of elders say they think this is wrong and harming the environment and the wildlife, that's usually not enough to stop that harm from happening. So we want to be able to do these things like mining, but in a way that has less impact on the wildlife and our environment. And I think the best way to do that is to have people living here, Inuit, being able to be the ones to to do the research and also be the ones in charge of making those decisions. And with the changing climate, it is very important for youth to have all the all the skills, um, all the skills they can get really, to be able to continue to be hunters. We're a very strong hunting culture, especially in Arviat. Most households rely on a traditional diet, and this is something we want to continue. We don't want this to change. And so having people involved in that economy, in that lifestyle, just makes sense to be the ones to make the decisions. Like, they're going to care about wildlife, they're going to care about the environment. And with climate change, it's more and more unstable. And so having the benefit of learning modern technology and science, along with the Inuit knowledge from the elders, this just makes sense as like the best way to the best way to prepare our youth to be the ones to kind of take over, if that makes sense. Also, research is very important, and it's always been happening in the Arctic, and I don't think that's going to change. And so one of the things that our communities struggle with is having enough jobs. So having that research money that's going into the Arctic, to research the Arctic, being able to capitalize on that, and having Inuit researchers be able to benefit from that economy. And also, one of the biggest things is communication. That's something in the past that was never done. Inuit weren't communicated with on what research was happening, and now this is changing. But oftentimes you have to adapt, and you have to be creative, and that's what we've been doing at Mugvik, because we found out pretty early on that translating scientific research into Inuktitut is difficult. So in a community where Inuktitut is so strong, that's definitely a barrier, and that leads to the distrust. And so if we can have research done by Inuit in Inuktitut, like, that is the goal. And so even when research is done in English, and then some people say it out loud, it's even still hard to understand, even if you know English. So it's super important that you be able to communicate the research. And yeah, we've been able to do this and partner with people like One Ocean, using the hydro box to map the depth of the ocean floor, and with partnering with Smart Ice, and being able to give nearly real-time data to the community that actually benefits them. So yeah, it is extremely important, and just makes sense that the youth be involved in this, and know that this is something that they can do as a career if they wanted to. And many Inuit enjoy being out on the land, and working with a biologist. You also, I noticed, you also need a very strong understanding of the environment you're in. And so it just makes sense, again, that Inuit youth be involved early on in research. Hopefully that they'll be able to take over. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much to our three speakers, Natalie, Shirley, and Nooks. That was great. That was very informative. That was an excellent look, both at some of the research results and some very interesting aspects of the research process. up there. Now, a quick note that we will be taking questions. You can type them into the Q&A box. If you go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see an option there, a little Q&A. You can type something in and we will address those questions as they come in. Just to begin with, maybe I'll introduce a question of my own. I heard a lot here about shipping and shipping travel and increased travel through the Arctic related to shipping. I wonder how much discussion there were about other uses. I know, for example, that there's some considerable increase in commercial shipping a little further east in Baffin Bay. I wonder if you heard much more about commercial shipping as an increased activity in this part of the world, and whether there were individual discussions about what to do about that.
Shirley, do you want me to start to answer that, or do you want to share an Arviat perspective?
If you can give the overall impression, Natalie, I can speak specifically to some of the concerns from Arviat.
Sure. One of the things we did during our discussions, in fact, was have images printed of different types of ships that are seen across the Arctic. So it could be pleasure craft, cruise ship, research vessels, cargo, resupply, to make sure that we were considering a lot of different kinds of ships. And certainly there was a lot of discussion that many of them are increasing. Particular cruise ships and passenger vessels are one that are being seen more and more. But that overall, in most of the communities, there had been increases in many different types of ships. And so some of the recommendations, they were related to the corridors, but others, they could be related to site guidelines, having monitors on board or guides if there were passenger vessels. And so there were recommendations that were related sometimes to specific ships. And often the recommendations were to say no ships at any time, but then of course the communities would say if it's an emergency, if it's, you know, national defense, it wasn't just a blanket statement of no ships ever. There were certainly acknowledgements that at times ships will need to get through.
And from, you know, the Arviat specific concerns really focused around the fact that the West Hudson Bay coast is becoming very rapidly more and more shallow. We have, you know, a lot of this is an area of very long tide flats, so it's very shallow to begin with. And it's riddled with reefs and rocky outcroppings left by glaciation. So it's a very dangerous coastal area. And the only marine maps that exist, which are very few, were done in the 1970s. Hence, you know, the reason we have equipped ourselves and taken on marine mapping as one of our key activities, because it's just not safe to go out in, you know, your 20-foot boat anymore, let alone an enormous ship trying to resupply our communities. Another concern is that our community is growing very, very rapidly. When I first arrived in Arviat in the mid-70s, there were 700 people. We're now 3,000. So this means that the need for resupply is going to be incrementally increasing all the time. And this pushes back our shipping date, especially since more recently, all of our resupply comes from Montreal or Newfoundland, which means it has a much longer way to come. It services Baffin communities before it gets to us, and it gets to us last. So for the last 2 years, our fuel resupply has happened after the sea ice has formed and has locked the fuel ship in as it's trying to deliver the fuel supply. And then the fuel ship has got to bash its way through the ice to get out of here. We don't have any ice breaking services anywhere close by, those kinds of things. So the concern for spills, for contamination, and for the devastating impacts that those things might have on our coast and on the wildlife population is huge for us. And then the third big piece for us is the wildlife population itself. Because the west coast of Hudson Bay are warming waters, you know, our beluga population is increasing very rapidly. This is great for us because we love to hunt beluga, but it means now that there are pods of 400 or more beluga whales moving up the coast at one time. And how are they going to be impacted by ships that are trying to cross their migration paths? So those are the kinds of issues that specifically are concerns for Arviat Mute, and which this research process helped to, you know, it helped us to consolidate those concerns and begin to look at what it is we need to do as a community in order to be proactive in terms of addressing those things. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent. Unless anybody wants to add anything else, feel free to cut me off if you do. But otherwise, maybe I'll introduce our next question. So we do have a question here from Meg asking, are ships changing their routes to preferred traffic patterns that were identified? Will and should these routes be adopted by the Canadian government? I think there was some reference made to individual industries making changes, but maybe this is maybe more of a question about how the broader Canadian government's responded to your recommendations.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing to keep in mind is that the low impact shipping corridors aren't yet legislated. The federal agencies that are working on that are still doing their consultations and refining it, and they're now moving on to discussing governance options. And so ships aren't changing their routes to these preferred traffic patterns that were identified, in part because the corridors don't formally exist yet. Like it's not, they're not in place, and so these haven't been adopted. Having said that, we've shared all of our reports with the agencies, the federal agencies that are responsible for it. They have our electronic shape files for the recommendations, and we meet with them several times a year just to update and to keep in touch and to make sure that we're working together on these things. I would say we haven't had a firm commitment that they're going to be adopted, but certainly they're well aware of our research. I would say, to me, these routes should be, I think it's extremely important that the discussion continues, that as these corridors evolve, that Inuit and Northerners have to be continued in these discussions, whether that's directly using the information that we've mapped, or if that's done through future projects and work that's done collaborate with communities, will remain to be seen. So yeah, I did mention about the mining company adjusting it, and certainly the information is being used by communities and Inuit organizations to inform their development of protected areas, of Inuit impact benefit agreements. So ultimately that may mean that ships are rerouting in response to this work.
Excellent, excellent. So then we have another question here that's touching on aspects of sort of marine preservation, long-term sustainability of our ecosystems in the Arctic, and the degree to which the participatory planning process here is looking into those questions. So just to sort of paraphrase the question that we have, you know, this participatory planning in this community engagement was talking about protecting wildlife, et cetera. There are some questions here about how, to what degree sorry, I'm sort of stumbling over this a little bit, but the question here is about how much the participatory planning action process achieved the targets, or how it goes about achieving the targets of protecting wildlife and making sure that we're not harming marine ecology in your part of the world. It's a bit of a mess, I understand, but maybe you could speak to the kinds of actions that came out of the participatory planning action that might target or focus on preserving marine ecology and ensuring that things are sustainable up there.
I'll start if you want, Natalie. Just specifically in our community, I mean, I talked to concern about the increased number of beluga and, you know, how shipping might affect the beluga population. I'll also mention that we have, you know, an increased number of polar bears, and polar bears for the last several hundred years have been moving from the James Bay area, you know, denning further and further north, so that now they are denning actually around Arviat. So when, you know, when the ice forms, if we're still getting resupply, if we're still having our fuel ship arrive in the middle of that forming ice, then of course, that is, you know, bashing through that ice is going to impact how that polar bear population has access to getting out onto thicker ice, you know, their migration along the flow edge, and how successful they're going to be at getting access to the to what they need to harvest in order to be healthy, rather than coming and sitting around our dump. So, you know, those are just two examples. We did do a lot of work on fish sampling, looking at the impacts of especially our fish populations that move from our inland waterways into our Arctic Ocean. Arctic char for the most part, and we're seeing fewer and fewer Arctic char in our waters as they go out into deeper and deeper waters. So, you know, we haven't immediately seen the impacts of that increased shipping. This is down the road. This is a kind of preparatory planning that this research was trying to look to. But as a community, in response to our engagement in this piece of research, it has definitely focused us on, in terms of wildlife, I would say those three areas of wildlife monitoring and closely looking at potential impacts on specifically those three wildlife populations. And there may be other applications that we find going forward, but that's where we're at specifically. You might.
I was just waiting to see if Nooks wanted to add anything. I can go ahead. I think an important aspect of the participatory planning is, and these action processes, that, you know, there's a growing movement and requirement for co-management to include government and Indigenous peoples in making these decisions, and to co-produce knowledge to answer some of these big questions and to provide evidence to inform policy. So I think looking at this multiple evidence base of bringing together Inuit knowledge and science, and each of them has a different way of knowing, but they're equal yet distinct types of knowledge. And by looking at them in parallel, and as Nooks spoke about, you know, conducting this research by Inuit for Inuit in Inuktitut, and working with scientists, we can get a more enriched understanding of what's happening. And so what it means is that in trying to achieve those targets of protecting wildlife, we've got the biggest, richest picture possible if we're bringing together as many different ways of knowing as we have. So I think that's really important ongoing for researching these topics and monitoring, and to inform policy for those who are involved in the decision making about protecting wildlife in these ecological areas and Inuit well-being.
Excellent. Yeah, it seems like, I suppose to paraphrase things a little bit, if you're going to understand how to protect things in a rapidly changing environment, you're going to have to tap into the knowledge of the people who are there, working with, living in that environment in a very close way, right? So the cultural protection, the cultural sustainability is entirely enmeshed with the marine ecosystem sustainability in a rapidly shifting location. Okay, excellent. A question specifically here for Nooks. What are some of the local biology and ecology questions that your youth research team has been working to answer? Oh, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. Been hearing that a lot lately. Meg, I saw your question, so I was just trying to write down all the areas that I've covered. I'm sure Shirley might have some more to add, as I just started again this summer as the Ujaksunet coordinator, but I worked previously with Aki Mugbik. So one of the main projects we're working on right now is polar bear denning, as Shirley mentioned. This is really important to our community, as it is very clear because of like, even when I was a kid, we didn't really have polar bears, and that's not that long ago. We used to be able to kind of run around as kids, go over to Nuvuk with like a group of like 15 to 20 like 10-year-olds, to go over to the point and just play and whatever, catch lemmings and yeah, try to catch birds. But yeah, the thought of doing that today is out of the question. We have way too many polar bears, and so using IQ is really important. But then like, the elders here don't really have IQ. They don't have traditional knowledge on polar bears because there were no polar bears. Like I said, it's something very recent. So we're having to get creative. Luckily, we have a local polar bear expert who came from Southampton Island, from Coral Harbor. And this is something that's been stalled by COVID, as we're planning to drive around, and he was going to show us how to locate polar bear dens, what kind of I guess, like, snow formation and habitat that they're looking for when they do make dens. So we won't be able to do that field work, but we actually have an interview with him in just over an hour, and he and so we're going to be doing phone calls with him, and we're just going to get as much information from him as we can, as we're adapting due to COVID. We've been in lockdown since November, so a lot of things are stalled right now. Another thing that we've done is monitor the fish health. So fish is a very big part of our diet, and so teaching youth how to necropsy fish, and sending them south for examination to monitor their health. So when we don't actually have expertise here in Arviat, that's when it's really good to partner with the universities and researchers down south that can help us figure these things out. We also do that with polar bear, or no, not polar bear, sorry, beluga. This summer, we were able to, with the Young Hunters program, go out beluga hunting. So in this program, they get to learn how to hunt. They get to learn boat safety. Like Shirley said, when you're boating, it's very important to know all the reefs. Boating is very expensive and dangerous. And so hitting a reef is dangerous, and you definitely don't want to do that. So you really need to be aware of those things. And then, so when they do have a successful hunt, like they did this summer, Keenan, Rain Copeland caught his first beluga whale, and we're able to sample it. So at the same time, we're showing the youth how to do that research. And then we partnered with Inuit, who is becoming a Inuit biologist, and we're partnering with her, and she's able to accept the samples and then process them for us and tell us the health. And we caught, I think, 5 belugas this year that we were able to sample. And we also do a call out for local hunters to come and grab sample kits. And this is something that's been happening for some years now. So many people have experience in how to collect samples, which samples to collect. And that also gives money to some of the hunters that do participate in that, which is always good, as gas and food is very expensive. We did local water monitoring, where we would monitor 3 or 4 different places in Arviat where people collect water. Our water here is very hard, with the one we get out of the tap, very chlorinated, and a lot of the people prefer to get their own water from the rivers at Keenan, Wolf Creek, and Third Bridge. There was one more, Keenan, Third Bridge. Maybe Shirley, you remember? I know there was an aquifer that we would check as well. So that's to make sure that drinking water is safe for the community. And what else? We did Arviat Goes Green, which is trying to see if growing food in Arviat could be sustainable, and also trying to use soil from Arviat and fertilizers from Arviat. So testing out different combinations of, I guess, soil mixtures and fertilizers to see which ones would work the best, which was pretty cool. We also have youth involved in all of these. That was one of my first projects, and the youth that were summer students in those programs are now ones that that are my coworkers. So we've done goose population research. So this is something that some elders and community members were concerned about, the overpopulation of geese and the effect that they're having on the environment, especially down around McConnell River. Large goose populations, yeah, they have a pretty big impact on the environment. And so that was something that elders pointed out, and that's something that we're trying to keep our eye on, again, partnering with other universities. Smart Ice is the
Caribou.
helping us get the thickness of
Caribou. Caribou.
Hi. Oh, okay.
Our staple.
The most important animal to us, caribou. So we, I think that was before I started. So maybe if Shirley wants to say something about that. I know we've been taking samples, I believe, of caribou.
Yeah, so the main diet consists of caribou in every season. We're fortunate to have it available in every season. But climate change is ravaging our caribou herds in that with the warming climate, we have lots of new parasites and incidents of diseases that are affecting the caribou herd. And the caribou herd is also being challenged by all of the mining development that is going on north of us. So that interrupts the caribou migration. And we're very concerned that building roads through the caribou calving grounds might actually devastate the herd. But one of the key activities that Nooks works on with Ujiswinak young hunters is gathering, like they take pictures when they come across an anomaly in a caribou. So, you know, some parasite or some disease in a caribou, they will photograph it, they'll put it on their Arviat Harvesters Facebook page. People will talk about how often they're seeing this. We'll meet with our local caribou biologist. We'll figure out what it is. And then Akumavik produces a poster that we can share with the community to describe what that is, sharing what it looks like in the animal, and then if the meat is safe to eat or how you dispose of the meat, or, you know, generally information about that. So, so all of that kind of monitoring, you know, from the sampling to observation of anomalies. Whenever that happens, we try to necropsy or gather tissue samples that we can then share and find out what's going on. And so maybe Nooks, I'll let you talk a little bit about how we use the Siku app to try and gather that information and then use the information that's collected on that app to promote a discussion and build awareness in the community.
So I am just gonna jump in here quickly. We are about 5 minutes over time. I think I'll ask Jennifer and Cindy to comment if there's no possibility for us to go over, but I just want to make sure that people have a chance to jump out. Now, I think we did have another question here about how this connects with the educational system and how it ends up creating the leaders of tomorrow, or even the northern researchers of tomorrow. And I think we've kind of touched on that, right? And that description of all the detail in terms of what we're monitoring, the range of what we're looking at, I think gives a sense of how we build to that. The other thing that I'll quickly, I see Shirley's embellishing on that a little bit in the written app. We also had a question about getting access to this presentation afterwards. We do typically post these things online. You should be able to see a link to the recorded webinar through the Cork website, corcop.com. That's the Coast and Ocean Risk Communication Community of Practice. You can see here a link to the website. I wouldn't be surprised if it also shows up in some connection with the Marine Risk Communication Forum. So with that, I suppose if there are any other additional questions that people, or sorry, additional answers people would like to give to these last remaining questions. Cindy says that we can keep this going a little bit. Not a technical issue, but it just gives our attendees a chance to duck out when they've got other things to do, and gives us a bit of a reminder to to keep an eye on that time. But Nooks, was there something you'd like to add?
Yep, thanks. Yeah, quickly, the Siku app is very helpful in most of our aspects of the Ujak Suinat program. So, like I like to tell the community members of Arviat, it's kind of like Facebook, but for wildlife and hunting around Arviat. It's also used a lot in Sanikiluak and starting to gain momentum in the rest of the Nunavut communities. So with Siku app, we can upload. Oh yeah, I see somebody shared the link. So you could upload your track before you go hunting. You can choose to start your track, and then when you come back, it'll have even when you go out of the cell phone data range, it'll have tracked your route, and that's something that you can upload onto the site. And with the help of Aki Mugbik, all the map that is used around Arviat all has the local names in Inuktitut. That was a big project that Aki Mugbik did, was getting the names of all these places. So again, it's really useful. And then you can post pictures of animals that you've harvested. And the more people use it, the more useful it is. It is also essential when we do our smart ice and the sea ice thickness monitoring. As Siku app and smart ice have worked together. So as soon as we get back to town from smart ice monitoring, it instantly goes up to, gets uploaded to the Siku app and then shared on the Siku app, the thickness of the ice where we traveled. And then for those who aren't on Siku, we share that through Facebook with the community. And this is something that we do in the Young Hunters program. So we teach youth how to use it. We're also with the polar bear denning, since we can't do any field research because of COVID, we're trying to get people that are hunting to take pictures and let us know if they see any polar bear dens. This is really important as people will be able to see the pictures and see what they look like, but most importantly, they'll be able to know where they are. As Shirley was saying, they're getting closer and closer to town. And yeah, like I said earlier, there's a lot of information that we don't have because we never grew up with these animals. So yeah.
Excellent, thanks so much. Shirley, I saw that you answered you provided a written answer. I don't know if I'll just give you a chance to speak to it if you'd like to send it out, broadcast it before we call it a day. Thanks.
Well, I'm thrilled that Joanne asked the question. She's worked with us in Arviat over the years. So she knows the impact that this program has on youth. And her area of research has been in terms of education on the land and how significant that can be compared to, classroom-based education. So that's something that we've been trying to advocate for. And I just said, so many of the youth that we work with say, I learned more in the 6-week Ujisuinak course than I have in, 3 years of high school science. And the thing about learning it on the land in a realistic application is essential to Inuit Kariumayaktukangit. Inuit say you cannot have knowledge unless knowledge is tempered through experience. If you don't take your knowledge and actually apply it in the real world, it cannot be termed knowledge. So this is something that we bring to researchers who want to come in and work with us. You cannot come in and work with us and mine everybody's brains for information. It cannot become knowledge unless you bring it back to our community and apply it in a realistic program that's going to benefit the people in our community. So, so this applies to knowledge building, and it certainly applies to research. And it's one of the pillars that Akimavik stands on in all the things we do. So it has to be meaningful. It has to impact, you know, people personally, and it has to build capacity and improve the common good of people in their everyday lives.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I see we have a new attendee. Hello. But with that, I think we're right at the end here. I just want to give one last thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. That was a great example of community engaged research up in the Arctic. It's very exciting stuff. Thank you so much for sharing, and we look forward to hearing more about this in the future. And I suppose with that, I will again give our speakers a round of applause. I'll point you to all those links that have been sitting up there for a while, and I'll say goodbye to all of you. See you soon.